Okay, so I'm all set up here with my paper folded into 3-inch sections. I've got my palette, I've got my water, about a few tablespoons in this cup. I've dipped my brush in the water. I've tapped it on the paper towel so that I have a little bit of, so I have a damp brush instead of a dry brush. And now I'm taking my palette knife and I'm stirring the gouache paint a little bit, just like I do a new jar of peanut butter that has oil on the top. Because that black stuff that was on top of it, I want to stir into it. That's definitely part of the paint mix. I'm sort of scraping down along the bottom corners of the jar and trying to get that stirred in and mixed up. I'm going to take my palette knife and I'm going to pull out some of this paint. I'm going to put it in one of these flat areas. Again, that's probably about a teaspoon of paint on my palette. If I take my brush and I brush my palette knife, and I'm getting a little more paint on, you'll see it's a little bit sticky. It kind of has a honey consistency. Now I want to wipe this off. Set it aside. So I'm going to pull my paintbrush through this on one side. I'm turn my paintbrush over and pull it through it on the other side. I'm going to go into one of these squares and I'm going to paint a line. So I paint from left to right because I'm right-handed. So I'm going to do what I call chipping in, which is I'm going to line up the flat edge of my brush with the flat line that I have here. Let me draw on this so that you guys can see it a little bit better. You can't really see my lines. So
Would you mind going over the folding part again? I just didn't get the last part.
If you fold your paper in half and then in half again, you'll get 4 equal sections that are 3 inches apart, right? Then to do 3 inches on this, you want to go a third. But what you can do is you can take a pencil or a paintbrush, set it at the end of one line or at the edge of your paper and pinch it at the line. So see how I'm putting my thumbnail right here on this line? Then I turned it sideways so I would know where the next line goes. And if you want to make a mark with a pencil or if you want to fold it that way, then you can get this folded into thirds. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. You can also just take a ruler and measure and draw 3 by 3 inch squares on here. I'm going to draw now so that you guys can see the sections because I think folding is not really great for the camera. My lines are wobbly. It's okay. I'm going to cut these with a razor blade next week when I get them all done. Actually, I'm going to do a lot more than this. I'm going to do at least 2 pages, probably 3 pages of paint swatches. I'm not going to have to do too many of the blue because, or the blue or the red or the yellow, because they're coming straight out of the pots. When I start mixing oranges and purples and greens, then I'm going to mix those. Or then I'm probably going to have to do more than one. So I might have a little bit of a ragged edge, but I'm pulling the paint across. I'm making sure that as I go, I have paint that's wet, by which I mean, if I get here to a dry area, I'm going to go back to a wet area before I start pulling again. I do want to work fairly quickly. If my paint starts drying out and it gets to, by the way, I put my lid back on my paint jar before I start doing this. If my, see how I smudged and smeared there? That's okay. We're going to paint over top of that eventually, but I want to fill this block. So I might go 2 directions on it. I like to sort of paint like a linen weave where I go across horizontally and then I go up vertically. But right now what I want to do is get paint all over this swatch. Mine is a little bit thick, so I'm going to go into my cup and I'm not going to swish or swirl. I'm just going to dip my brush in once or twice so I get a little bit of water, and I'm going to mix that with my brush into this paint over here, and that's going to make it run a little more. So your paint consistency, if it's not pulling, if it's like gloppy and gross on your paper, you don't want to put too much water in. It's going to curl the paper up a lot, right? So this is now experiment time. You need to find out what I mean by the right consistency, right? You may want to put a piece of paper underneath your paint. You may have something down on your table that keeps you from doing what I just did. I'm going to pour a little water into a paper towel for cleaning. Get this off my table right away. And then I'm going to put something underneath it so I can brush towards the edges without getting it all over my table. So paint an approximately a 3x3 inch swatch. If you have little white spots in it, you may want to dip your brush in the water again. If you have gloppy paint like I do here, I don't know if you can really see this in the light, but this paint has a lot of brush strokes in it, so I want to smooth it out. Therefore, I'm dipping my brush in the water and then dipping that into the paint and getting my paint a little bit smoother. And I'm going back and forth across it in one direction only, whether I've decided horizontal or vertical is what I'm going to do. I'm trying to smooth this all out so that I'm getting a nice and smooth, very solid, pulling now at the end of my process from the very edge to the other very edge so that I don't get those paint strokes in the middle. And I've got something now, see if I can get it in the light a little shiny. That's very smooth. I don't have any paint stroke. You can see brush marks in it, but you can't see that, but I haven't started in the middle to make the end of the brush mark there. All the brush marks go in the same direction, and this is very smooth paint. If you can get it to that level, you'll get an A. You're doing very well. If you can't get to that level, then you're going to keep practicing. And don't worry, we're going to practice, 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 and keep going with this. Now, this wet blue brush, I'm going to take this wet paper towel and I'm going to fold it over like I showed you in the video so that that brush doesn't dry out. I want each one of you to paint a square of paper with a color straight out of the bottle, right? Red, yellow, or blue. You make your choice. When you go to paint the next one, you're going to make sure that this paint is dry before you paint the next swatch. So I'm going to jump over a swatch and paint on the opposite corner when I do my next color, because I don't want any wet blue getting into my yellow since I'm going to do yellow next. So when it comes time to mix colors, you're going to make sure that you're mixing the dark color into the light. So I have some blue on my palette here. I want to make a green. I'm going to take some yellow, of course, cleaning my palette knife first so I don't get, it's very important not to get your colors mixed up in the jars, right? If they get mixed up in the palette or on the paper or on the table, you can fix all that. But once you've tainted a jar, you've tainted a jar. So I'm actually dipping my palette knife into the water and I'm cleaning it of all the wet paint. My palette knife looks new. I'm actually going to take another cup and I'm going to pour a little bit for yellow so that I have a warm cup and a cool cup. So I will probably dip my yellow paintbrushes. You can see about how much water now I'm putting into a cup. This is my blue cup with about that much water at the bottom of it. I've put a little water in the yellow cup. Because I'm mixing yellow and blue, I'm not going to clean my brush or worry too much about that at this point. But if I were to go and paint the yellow, I would take this brush and I would wipe out all the paint, just like I showed you in the video. I would clean it in the sink and then I would do my yellow swatch, okay? But I'm going to do my green swatch next. So I'm going to use my dirty blue brush and show you how to mix color. So I'm taking my yellow, stirring it up, and putting a glop of that on my palette next to my blue glop. I think glop is a technical term, isn't it? Okay, so I said we were going to mix the darker color into the lighter color. Color has three properties. They are called hue, which means the color itself. So when I say I'm using yellow and I'm using a different hue, which is blue, I'm using two hues here, right? Color also has lightness and darkness. We call that value in art school, right? So value is the lightness and darkness of a color. And so what I want to make sure and emphasize here is that I'm mixing the darker color into the lighter color and not the other way around. The reason for that is that I'll waste a lot of paint. If I'm putting white into a color to lighten it, I'll use a whole pot of white before I lighten this blue paint. Whereas if I put the blue into the white, I just use a tiny bit of blue and it will tint the white and make a very light blue. So to make a green, I'm going to go with this yellow paint. I'm going to actually just take this palette knife. I'm going to scoop up a little bit of blue. And I'm going to put it into the yellow paint and I'm going to start stirring it. I'm going to mix it up by smashing it onto the palette and then stirring it and smashing and stirring and smashing and stirring, trying to press down with my palette knife. Now I start judging my work. What have I got here? Is this yellow? Is this green? Is this blue? It's in between yellow and blue, we know, right? I wouldn't call it green yet. So if we go to our color wheel, we want to have colors in between the yellow and the green, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Here's the 12 colors that we need. So I have yellow and I have blue. I actually need, this is the blue out of the bottle. So I need actually, besides the green, I need to have a greenish yellow and a bluish green, right? So primary colors are called primary, red, yellow, and blue, because they have to be made from nature. They have to be bought in the bottle. You can't make a blue. You can find a rock and grind it up and make a blue, or you can find red in nature or yellow in nature, but they come as primary colors. So that's primary means first. Secondary, of course, means second. So if I mix yellow and blue, I get green. If I mix blue and green, I get a teal or a greenish blue. And if I mix yellow and green, I get a chartreuse or a yellowy green. This actually might work for my chartreuse. I'm looking at the thing online. I'm thinking maybe it's not going to be quite green enough. So I'm going to take a little bit more blue and mix it in. I want it to look somewhere in between yellow and green. For tertiary, so primary is first, secondary is second, right? Tertiary is what we call those colors in between. So tertiary colors we don't have a name for. Notice that I'm saying yellow green, right? Yeah, we called it chartreuse, but if people start saying a greenish yellow or a yellow green, what we need is something that people can't really say, is that yellow or is that green? So now I've got something here I'm pretty happy with. I think it's kind of yellow and kind of green. I might take that and take my brush. Now, if I'm going to use this blue brush, I think I'm going to wipe out quite a lot of paint because I've got a blue in there. Where's my blue cup? Dip into my blue cup. I'm not actually going to go to the sink. I'm just going to wipe because I have blue in my chartreuse. If you started with red, you will be working now with a purple, right? Or towards a purple, or towards a orange. Okay, cool. So my brush has a little bit of blue residue in it, but because I'm painting a green and green is a part of that, I'm pretty confident that my brush is clean enough because I've wiped all of this blue into the paper towel that I'm going to be able to paint the chartreuse without getting stripes. Now, if I start loading my brush, this is called loading. If I'm swiping my brush across the paint over here and I'm seeing blue stripes, then I need to keep loading. I need to keep smashing and squishing and pushing. I'm even going to dip into the water. I just dipped into my blue water. I'm not going to worry about, because there's not a lot of water in there. If you need to get a new cup, you are in control. You decide when to clean your brush. You decide when to change your water. You decide all that kind of stuff, right? All right, I've got a pretty good thing. I'm going to paint a 3-inch square of that. Got a color I'm pretty satisfied with. I'm going to go ahead and paint that down. I'm going a little wetter this time. I found that last time the honey consistency was not great for me. If I'm painting over here on my paper and I start seeing stripes of color, then I need to go back to my palette. I need to reload. I need to re-stir. I need to re-squish around in there until my paint gets to be a good consistency for me. Once I get this down, I'm going to pull from edge to edge, try and get a nice, even tone throughout. I see here, I have a little bit of white of the paper coming through. So I'm going to go back over to the paint. I think I'm going to pull it across the opposite direction. Like I said, linen, I'm going to pull this horizontally where I went vertically before. Try and get that to be super duper smooth and even. Okay. So now I have a chartreuse swatch and I have a blue swatch. My next step is to keep mixing blue into my chartreuse until I get a green, because I haven't achieved green yet. I need more blue paint. It may help for you guys to have something like a popsicle stick or something. You can also pour paint. So I'm going to just pour a little of this paint because I'm not dipping this yellow into my blue. That is the ultimate no-no in terms of color mixing. You do not want to mix it in the jar or the whole jar will be tainted. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to pour a little bit. I'm going to wipe the edge so the lid will go back on. I've poured out another half teaspoon of paint in there so that I can come over here and grab some of that and mix it into my chartreuse. And I'm headed towards green still. See how much my color has changed when I put more blue in. Now, if you mixed a beautiful green when you did blue and yellow, then what you need to do is make another puddle of yellow here and mix the green into it to get the chartreuse that you want. Okay. Because green is darker than yellow. Blue is pretty low on the value scale, right? Red, I would say, is just above it. Sometimes when we scan, if we scan into black and white, red will read as a black. But I think that's an old style of talking. I don't think people really do color Xerox much anymore. I've got something here that's kind of a green, but it still reads as a yellow green. I think I'm going to paint a square of that. And this is what I mean by you're going to paint more than 12 squares. You guys are going to do a whole bunch of color swatches, and then you're going to decide which ones are great. Next week, we'll look at your color swatches and we'll decide which ones we want to use for the project. This paint is dry to the touch, so I can paint next to it. You may want to keep skipping over squares, or maybe paint. Why don't I do this? I'll paint in the middle of this. This is much more green than that chartreuse that I did before. But I still think I'm in the parameters of a tertiary color. I don't think that I'm quite to a secondary green yet. But I'm going to lay some of this down because it may turn out with this nice color. I like this color better. My first chartreuse had so much yellow in it. It's kind of gross. I know that's not a technical design term, but that's where it starts. The good thing about art is you can trust your gut. Your instinct will tell you if it's not quite there yet, right? So you're looking at your color and you're like, oh, that's just nasty. Or it's beautiful, or it's, of course, design professionals sort of make nasty, gross colors, and then they make them beautiful by placing them next to other colors. So color is always relative or comparative to what's around it. Color also changes according to the light, right? So I'm working in my studio now with an artificial light source, which is yellow light. If I took this outside or carried it over to the window, I would get quite a different look at what I'm doing. In fact, I could probably give you guys a better light. Let me see if I can turn on a different kind of light here and give you a better look at what these colors are. This color is coming across on my camera as being sort of an army green. It's not. They're much yellower. This is really a pretty, a beautiful green. Something that, as I look at this online, these two colors are nothing like the color that I've painted here in the room. However, I do know I still need to go further to get to a green. So I think I still have a dollop of blue there. I'm just going to pull that into my lovely yellow green. And I'm going to go one step darker. That feels like a green. I like that a lot. Smashing, rubbing, working it out with my palette knife. And then, since my brush is dirty and it has that other yellow green in it, I'm smashing and pushing my brush down into the paint until I stop seeing stripes. Maybe I take a dip into the water. Hope things all mix up. Oh, by the way, water changes the color of the paint. So if you paint wet paint over dry paint, even though it came from the same swatch, you're going to see it looking a little bit lighter. I believe it's actually, it should be darker with the color in it, or sorry, with the water in it. Wet paint will be darker and it's going to dry a little bit lighter. So that's another complex aspect of what we're doing. This is a nice green. If I were to actually use this green, it's too close to the green I just painted. So maybe I need to mix something that's in between that first chartreuse and the second one. Or maybe that first chartreuse really was good. I don't know. As I say, color is relative. Everything depends on what lies next to it. So this color wheel, you folks who are in interior design, and many of you know as you design spaces, that you need to paint a color onto a wall, right? Before you paint an entire wall or you buy an entire room worth of paint, right? You're not going to go buy 5 gallons of paint until you put it on the wall to look at it. That has to do with the light in the room. It also has to do with what's surrounding it. So you maybe are trying to match a sofa or a pillow or a piece of artwork in the room. So you need to look at that paint on the wall for a couple of days and see if that's going to actually work for you. Of course, there's something called color continuation as well, which means that the more of that paint you get into the room, the different it's going to look, right? The different it's going to look. There's some professional language for you. it's going to change your perception of the color if you have a lot of that color surrounding you, right? So even that paint swatch on the wall may be only another step towards the final product. All right, so I have two greens here. They're kind of too close for a color wheel, but this is good. I'm experimenting, I'm learning about color. This is all part of my process. As I go green towards blue, I now have this green. I can keep mixing blue. I need to pour another dollop. And mix blue into this until I get a blue-green, or what I'm going to call a teal today. All right.